Okay, and whilst we give people just a few minutes to join, if you just drop in the chat your name and where you are joining from, that would be great, just so that we know who's on the call, where you're joining from. I always love to kind of understand the different areas of the world that people are joining from. I think it's so cool. I think that's been one of the great things about technology. So we'll just give it a minute or so for people to catch up and jump on. Also, whilst you're doing that, if you came to my last session, you know that I like to start with a check-in. So this is some time for you. It's Friday. This kind of session is probably a change in pace for you. So just take some time now to check in with yourself, to switch gears, grab some water, tea, whatever your beverage is, stretch, take a couple of deep breaths, because I really want you to be able to absorb what we're going to talk about in this session and to show up as the best possible version of yourself that you can for this time. So oftentimes if we're going from back to back meetings, we don't give ourselves that space and time to breathe and check in. So I want to give you that time to check in now. I'm really, really tight. I don't know how I slept, but that's a story for another day. So just check in with yourself and we'll get started in a second or two. So if you need to grab water, a toilet break, I like to give it a few minutes, because I know if you've joined from another session, it can be tough going from back to back. Okay, so let's jump in. I thought it would be lovely to start with a bit of an intro about me. So, for those of you that don't know, my name is Nisi Ozibu, and I've worked in change management for around 15 years now in a variety of roles, variety of industries, as a permanent member of staff, as a contractor, as a functional consultant, just the various ways that you can engage with an organization to deliver successful or unsuccessful change. I live in Kent with my family, my husband and my two boys, and I'm really passionate about seeing change practitioners lead with influence and impact. I think the world is changing and the way that we approach and deliver change needs to change. And it's my personal mission to give as much as I possibly can to you on the call and to leaders around the world, to equip them with the mindset and the skills and capability to be able to lead in this kind of continuous change environment. So that's a little bit about me. I would love to know a bit about you, what your current role is. If you haven't already, please do drop your name and your where you're joining from in the comments. But if you get your phone or if you're on your computer, if you could drop onto Slido, put the code in, so the 7242752, and if you could let me know what best describes you now. This will also help me in terms of tailoring the session. So if you could do that, that would be great. And let me just switch what I'm seeing so you can see the results as they're coming through. Let me know if Slido is working for you okay. This is the first time I am using it, so bit of a learning curve for me. Okay, so it's looking like we've got majority change manager, we've got some non-change managers on the call, which I always love, because change management isn't just for change managers. I'm a firm believer in that change management is a capability that we all need to build. Okay, so you can see the results there. Great. So if you just carry on putting your votes in, and I'll continue with the session. It's just great to see what the makeup is on here. So let me go back to presenting my slides. So this session, what are we going to cover? We're going to look at the four types of change managers, and which one you are. We're also going to look at some of the why some change managers create momentum while others hit roadblocks. We're also going to look at some practical steps to move from task execution to strategic influence. And then finally, we're also going to look at how to drive change that leaders respect and employees engage with by understanding your organizational context. But before we get into that, I want to talk to you a little bit about what sustainable change is, because the framework of the four types of change managers is based on the value and the impact that they have in relation to sustainable change. So the way that I am thinking about sustainable change in this context is sustainable organizational change means making improvements that keep working over time. It happens by fixing core issues involving employees and ensuring changes fit the company's goal and culture. Instead of short term fixes, it focuses on steady progress that adapts to challenges and helps the organization grow. So it's well paced, it focuses on long term impact, it addresses root causes, involves employees, and aligns to company culture. So the framework of the four types of change manager is okay, so how do you work in relation to sustainable change? And this is what I mean by sustainable change. So I think it was really important to set that out. Now, in terms of the four types of change managers, I want to tell you a bit about the background of the model and how it's come about. So over the years, I've noticed that my role as a change manager has evolved. And looking back, I can see how my impact on sustainable organizational change has increased as I've adapted my approach. I developed the four types of change managers based on my personal evolution. So the quadrants that you'll see are based on my personal evolution. There is some simplification, there is some generalization, as there usually is with these models, but they are still massively helpful in understanding how you can adapt your approach to deliver maximum value. So that being said, this is the framework. And the reason why I put this session in is because I posted about this and it really resonated. I think about over 15,000 people had read it at that time. I think around now it's about 20,000 people. And a number of people have said, even I'm not even a change manager, and this resonates with me. So I thought it would be great to have a look at this in a bit more detail, have some conversation. I'll be leaving some time at the end for questions so that if you've got anything. Oh, there's a lot of noise on the mic. Might be my papers rustling. Let me know if this is any better. So I wanted to get this time in so that you can ask a number of questions and see how that works for you. I've tried to amend the where I've got my papers positioned. So let me know if there's still a lot of background noise on the mic. So first is the task-driven manager. So the task-driven manager has low knowledge of sustainable organizational change, and they have low impact. But that doesn't mean that they have no use. As I said, this is based on my evolution as I've gone on my change journey. And please do let me know if the mic is any better. There's about a 30-second lag, so that's why the things are coming through. So, as a task driven manager, there's a focus on ticking boxes and delivering activities, but without the expertise or influence to drive meaningful, lasting change. So this approach leads to great short-term execution. You're great at, getting a checklist and getting it done, but little value in terms of long-term transformation. So that's the task manager. So you can see they're orange on the quadrant. Then you've got the academic or the academic change manager. Okay, it looks like the sound is getting better now. Perfect. Let me know if that changes. So the academic has high knowledge about organizational change, sustainable organizational change, but very low impact in terms of delivering it. And this is because they deeply understand change theory, but they struggle to turn the insights into action. So really, really great at understanding theoretically what happens, but in terms of translating it into action, a bit of a struggle. And so their insights are great for context and strategy. Usually they'll get a really get along really well with senior leadership, but they lack the execution needed to drive and make a lasting difference. So that's the academic, the grey on the quadrant. Then let's go to the process driven manager. So they've got low knowledge of sustainable organizational change, but they have incredible impact. And this is because they're strong on governance and structure, on ensuring that changes are managed well. So you also maybe find people in the program and project management space in that quadrant. However, without deeper knowledge of how to drive sustainable organizational change, so, power dynamics, neuroscience, understanding data insights in relation to people, they struggle to have that long term impact and value. And then finally, the green on the quadrant is the strategic change leader. So this is the gold standard. This is where I personally believe we all need to move to, or need to flex and be more, to drive that sustainable change. So the strategic change leader balances theory with practical execution, and they're embedding change within the organization to make sure that it lasts. So in today's world, where continuous change is the norm, to support it, organizations need more strategic change leaders, those who can align knowledge with impact and create lasting transformation. Also, the strategic leader is a combination of the areas on the quadrant. So they understand process and governance. They're really great at making the checklist and knowing what the immediate tasks are that need to get done. But they've also got this great, really deep academic knowledge and of the theory and the methodology of change management. And they know how to flex these different skill sets depending on their organizational context. So, because the world and the way we manage change is changing, everyone is finding their way, and awareness of how we show up, so what our strengths and what our areas of improvement are, is key. Because only then can we make adjustments to better serve our organizations and our communities. So that's an overview of the four types of change manager. And I'd love to hear from you now. Based on that, where do you think you sit on that quadrant? So it's back to the good old Slido. I believe it's the exact same code. So I know somebody had put a comment asking for the code. So let me just switch over. And let me know, based on your understanding of the four areas, where would you position yourself now? Give you a second. I know last time I moved on quite quickly and some people missed the code, so I'll give it a second. I think, okay, so we've got a number of process driven and academic. There's loads of people, so 67% in the academic, a couple of strategic, not that many, well, no task focused at the moment. So that's really, really interesting. So what I'm going to do now is step through the different areas in the quadrant and steps that you can take to become more strategic. So that's what we're going to look at now. And why do I think this is important? So just in case I haven't push the message enough. So the strategic change leader is perfectly positioned to show up in organizations that, remember, a lot of organizations are still getting their head around change management. And because the pace of change is so fast now, we need to have the skill set to be able to educate, but also to be able to implement and advise. And so that's why the strategic change leader is absolutely key. So I'll quickly go over the task manager because there's nobody on the call who's identified themselves as the task manager, but you might know some people who are in this quadrant and therefore you can give them some advice in that way. So the task manager, many change managers, especially at the beginning of the career, so I know at the beginning of my career, this is where I sat, we can get stuck in execution mode managing a list of tasks, and completing checklists, but struggling to be seen as strategic leaders. So the shift happens when we focus on outcomes, influence, and business impact. So outcomes, influence, business impact, with those at the forefront, immediately the way you view work shifts. Now, the strength of the task manager is they're highly efficient, they follow plans, they get things done. They are massive, massive doers. However, the challenge is with no strategic focus, with execution without ownership, you may find that you are doing the work yourself and carrying the burden instead of influencing and advising the business areas to be able to carry out the task for themselves. So, how do you transition to the strategic change leader? You want to start prioritizing efficiency over effective. Well, you need to stop prioritizing efficiency over effectiveness. So, what does this mean? Prioritize impact over speed. Just because something's done fast, so you've ticked off your tick box, doesn't mean it's been done well. That needs to be flipped, and a focus on efficiency needs to happen. You need to move from solving problems in isolation to solving problems as a group. So, understanding the right stakeholders to engage early and often and to keep them in that loop. You want to move from relying on authority to relying on influence. When you're in that task manager spot, as I said at the beginning of my career, that's very much where I was. And it was very much hierarchy. Okay, the leaders said this, people do it. No, start focusing on building trust and support by demonstrating value instead of enforcing compliance. And then you also want to stop avoiding difficult conversations. So sometimes you can be so focused on being a doer that when difficult conversations arise, you don't feel equipped to be able to push through with them. So instead of avoiding resistance, you want to lean in and learn instead of sidestepping. And then finally, move from chasing short term wins to looking at long term impact. Okay, you've done your checklist, but what does that mean in the wide scheme of things? And shifting that focus. So, if you know a couple of task managers, those are some things that you can take away to them in terms of, okay, so how can we shift your delivery so that you're focusing on a more long term impact? Now we're going to look at the academic manager, and a number of you, I think it was about 50%. Let me check. Yeah, about 50% called yourselves out as being academic leaders. So you'll have a really deep theoretical knowledge about change, but you'll know that that doesn't automatically translate into driving meaningful change. And so your strengths are you've got that deep knowledge, you know the models, you know the theories, you know the frameworks. But the challenge is how do you get that to bring alive real world execution and leadership buy-in. So the first kind of barrier that you'll need to overcome is over explaining instead of inspiring action. My personal mantra is do until you have to say. So words are a tool in my toolkit, but it's not the first thing that I go to. If I can show instead of tell, that's my default. So focus on real world impact instead of theory. So for those theories that you've got, take a step back and think about, okay, so how do I translate this to the business in a way that resonates for them? The second barrier that you're going to need to overcome is staying in research mode too long. So, looking at what's the best theory for this particular change? What are the plans saying? And, over analyzing. So, how do you step out of that? De-risk the process. So if you've got this massive change in front of you and you're thinking, actually, it feels very scary and uncertain to I don't know, set up this framework for this specific change. Find small areas to test and learn. Get real world experiments and learn from those. Don't wait for the perfect plan because I promise you, reality will always destroy the most perfect of plans 100% of the time. The third barrier that you might find yourself needing to overcome is assuming logical arguments will convince people. So you've got the data, you've got the knowledge, you've got the understanding, but people are primarily emotion led. We need our thinking brain to catch up in super simple terms. So you want to be using emotion and desire to drive action. And for those of you familiar with the ADKAR model, the desire in the outcome model, and there's a reason for that, because we need to inspire people internally to want to go on the change journey. Telling them about it is not enough. How do we make this a movement that people want to get involved in? So that's a question that you can ask yourself. Another barrier that you might find yourself faced with is not engaging enough with key decision makers. And it's really, really important to engage with the key decision makers, because they'll be able to give you information about your team, about your organization, to then build your desired strategy and create the pull and the story needed to navigate people through the change. And then finally, another barrier that you might find yourself coming up again is teaching instead of leading. And it's super easy to fall into that zone of teaching instead of leading. I've done it a number of times. And to do that, you want to move from explaining concepts to facilitating action. So if you're having a session with a team, instead of using the whole session to explain the theory of change management, how about you use that session instead to tackle a real world issue, or to do the change impact assessment, or to get their hands dirty and to make the change tangible for them? Because at the end of the day, strategic leaders don't just understand change, they make it happen. So that's really important for the academic leader, steps that you can take. Next, we've got the process driven changes that you could make and steps that you can take to develop your strategic capabilities. And so your strengths as a process driven leader, you'll find that you're great at governance, at compliance, and structured execution, and wonderfully you're detail oriented. I'm not that detail oriented now, and I need people around to help me with that. It's something I have to really work on to flex that muscle. But some of the challenges of being a process driven leader is sometimes you can maybe be a bit too rigid and lacking in adaptability, and then there's that focus on process over people. So this is the plan, this is what we're working to, and nobody's going to stop me. Not as that drastic, but it shows up in areas. And so the barriers that you'll need to overcome is, number one, prioritizing process over people. So it's about reminding yourself that frameworks don't drive change, plans don't drive change, people do. So focus less on governance and more on the individual experience of change. And you can do this by talking to the people impacted by change, really soaking up that change impact assessment process and understanding what does it mean for this specific individual to move from current to future state. Another barrier that you might find yourself needing to overcome is measuring the wrong things. And this is a systemic issue. You find whole organizations measuring the wrong things at time. And so to overcome that, you'll need to make that mindset shift in understanding that adoption rates and completed training sessions mean nothing if behaviors don't change. So start tracking business outcomes instead. It's about keeping your eye on what truly matters. Another barrier that you might have to overcome is you follow the process even when it's not working. So this is what we set out to do in the beginning. I'm just going to keep doing it because eventually, some way, somehow, it's going to work. Not always. And so to overcome this, it's about adaptability and understanding that just because something is best practice, it doesn't mean it's best for your organization. So challenge outdated approaches. I always say change leaders need to be quite bold, because the whole point of change is to challenge the way things were done beforehand. But I get it, easier said than done. Another barrier that you might find yourself needing to overcome is thinking that hierarchy determines influence. And to overcome this is about understanding that leadership isn't just in job titles. You need to be able to identify the true influencers and the networks and power dynamics within an organization and get them on board early. Finally, another barrier that you might see is seeing change as an event and not a journey. So it's that overcoming that go live is not the end goal. And shifting your mindset from delivery to sustainability, because in the real world, work starts once implementation has already happened. So that's a shift that needs to take place. Now, finally, we're going to look at what it means to stay ahead as a strategic change leader. I know there's a number of you on the call who had said that you are strategic change leaders already, about 25%. And so your strengths are in combining strategy, execution, leadership, but the challenge is you need to continue to kind of sharpen your short sword and stay there. Because just because you were good at it yesterday or in that previous change, it doesn't mean that that exact same toolkit will keep you ahead going forward. And so the barrier that you'll need to overcome is, thinking that I've got it, I've got it, I've done this for however many years or however many changes, it's fine. Pause, take some time to reflect, get feedback. How can you continue to refine your skill and your processes? Another barrier that you might need to overcome is focusing on your own impact and not building others. So, the great thing about being a strategic change leader is that you've shown that you're able to draw upon these various skill sets. Now, how can you build that capability in other people? I've mentioned this at the beginning of the call, but change management is more than a discipline. It's a capability. It's a skill that everybody needs to build, regardless of if they're a change leader or not. So, what's your role in doing that? Another barrier you might need to overcome is assuming that change will always be hard. When you have been through a number of changes and you've gotten through it by grit, you can start to assume, because our brain protects us in that way by making certain prediction. You might start to assume that change is always going to be, it's a tough graft. But sometimes it's great to kind of step back and look at the environment, and this might be a relatively easy change. Maybe you don't need to be as it doesn't need as a comprehensive change package because people are already in a position where they can transition smoothly. So just taking that time to step back and check in and see, well, what's the right change for this, and not assuming based on past experience that you've got it kind of locked down. So I've been through those in a whirlwind. I'm going to stop now to give you a chance to ask any questions. And then after the questions, we are going to have a short exercise. So, have you got any questions based on what I've just been through? Again, there's a bit of a lag, so I'll wait for this to catch up. What do I see as the toughest group shifting to strategic? In my experience, it's been the academic. And the reason being, when you've got a very deep understanding of change theory, it can lull you into a false sense of value. And that might seem a bit harsh, but that's what it is, because you're having all these really great conversations. And in that conversation, having a conversation is a type of act, but it's a very low act. In terms of the impact scale, conversation is not right at the bottom, but there's other things that are a bit more impactful. So I think it's incredibly hard to make that transition from academic to strategic because you need to make the shift to do. However, for people who are doers, once they mentally understand, actually, on reflection, I'm very academic in my approach to change. I need to do it. That shift can happen instantaneously. But it's for the people who get the comfort from, reading and methodologies, and that's what they like. That can be a real blocker, because you've got to remember there are change management academics, people who write about change for a living. So for some people, maybe they're finding themselves as a practitioner, maybe when they're more suited to an academic. But yeah, just because the academic is not embedded as much in actions and delivering, I think that can be quite tricky. Any other questions? Just whilst I wait for that to come through, if there are any other questions. So I want you to take a moment to reflect now, and I'm calling this the unfollow yourself test. So imagine you are an employee affected by your change initiative. Would you willingly follow yourself as a leader? And I'm not asking you to share this, so just kind of reflect on it within yourself. Now, list three reasons why you would. Be honest and list three reasons why you wouldn't. Now, the reason why I'm asking you to do this is because self awareness is incredibly important. Because being a strategic change leader, it's not a static position, it's something that's consistently shifting and moving depending on what organization you're in, depending on what your role is within the change. So, you're constantly having to reassess and check in with yourself and how you're being perceived by other people. So, this is a really good habit to get into to check in on that. Just give you a minute or so to do that. Okay, so now I'm just going to quickly go through how you apply the strategic change management type to different organizations, because it would be way too simple to just say, you know what, once you've got a skill set of being a strategic change leader, any organization you go into, do the exact same copy and paste and it will be fine. Absolutely not. You have to flex and adapt depending on the type of organization you're working in. So, for hierarchical organizations or bureaucratic organizations, an example would be a large corporation or government agencies. To succeed, you want to be able to leverage governance to your advantage. So, that's speaking the language of compliance and risk, because that is their bread and butter. They're very kind of regulated. You want to build senior leadership sponsorship. It's really, really important because of the organizational structure. If you don't have leaders on board and if they're not filtering down, you'll find that your change efforts falter. So without that executive alignment, change efforts just come to a standstill. And you want to create metrics that leaders care about. So this is tying change to efficiency, regulatory benefits, or even cost reduction. So it's about understanding, well, what's the number one or, top five aims of this type of organization, and how do I show up based on that type? So next, you've got agile and fast-paced organizations. So some examples are startups or tech companies. And to succeed here, you want to make sure that you are using agile change management where you can. So implement fast, implement small, iterate instead of relying or pushing for very long rollouts. You want to align with business priorities, and these may be shifting quite often because they are agile, they are fast paced. And you also want to embed change, don't announce it. So, whereas with the hierarchical, I don't know why I keep saying this word, but whereas on the hierarchical organization, an announcement is expected. For the agile and fast paced organizations, it's less announcing and more doing. Integrate change into existing workflows rather than pushing for formal programs. Then you've got your matrix and cross-functional organizations. So some examples would be, multinational or global organizations, professional services firms. And to succeed here, you want to make sure that you've got really clear, solid stakeholder mapping. You need to take stakeholder mapping everywhere, but more so in the matrix and cross-functional organizations, because 9 times out of 10, the org chart doesn't reflect how work gets done. So identify influencers, decision makers, and resistance point early, and power dynamics so that you're able to work with those. You want to create a shared vision because remember, in these different pockets of and worlds of work, they'll have completely different visions and aims of what they're trying to do. So you want to align change to common organizational goals. And you also want to empower local change agents. So again, because of the complexity of the organizational makeup, you want to have the change champions in the different business units to bring you information and intel on how change is being received and the best way to roll it out, and also to send the information out as well. Then you've got family owned organizations or founder led. And some examples would be privately held businesses, legacy brands, family run enterprises. And to succeed here, you want to make sure you're respecting that legacy. But frame change as an evolution, not a revolution. Because remember, there's usually a lot of pride and belonging in the founding story of that organization. Just show how change builds on the company's values, it's not replacing them. You also want to build very personal relationships because influencing change, especially in these kind of organizations, comes through trust and credibility. Finally, it's also about evidencing small wins. So show how minor adjustments can bring business benefits before pushing large transformations. And you'll see that these nuggets and bits of advice that I'm giving, depending on the organizational type, you can bring the advice from family owned to hierarchical and so on. You can switch them about, but just as a kind of starter for 10, when you're going in, it's about scanning, horizon scanning, understanding the organization, and tailor making your change approach based on what you understand of them. So finally, you've got mission driven and non-profit organizations, so NGOs, charities, educational institutions. And to succeed here, you want to connect change to the mission. Show how change enhances the organization's purpose. Leverage storytelling. Use impact driven narratives to gain buy in. And you want to maximize community involvement. So, using grassroots engagement to accelerate adoption, because they're very about their mission. And having worked for a couple of mission based or mission driven and non-profit organizations, you'll find that people are working there specifically because of that mission, and it's tied to their identity, who they are as people. It's not just a job. So you want to make sure that you are leaning into that as much as possible. So now I want you to just take some time to think about what you've heard here and to make a personal commitment. What's one thing that you can do in the next 7 days to improve how you lead change? And if you want accountability, drop that commitment in the live chat and tag myself, or if you've got a colleague on the call, tag them so that they can check in with you. So you've had a second to do that. Okay. So, what does this mean for you? To round up, every change manager has strengths and limitations, and these strengths and limitations are personal and systemic. So, there's things that we can do, there's ways that organizations are set up that help and hinder the way that we drive change. So, it's just really important to have that awareness of our skill set and how it reflects based on the different environments. So, what I always encourage is before you kind of leap into operational work, when you're stepping onto a new project or change program, take some time to do an analysis of your strengths and limitations in relation to that specific change program. Don't just dive straight in. It's very, very important to do that assessment and see where you're going to have to pay attention based on the context that you've been provided with. Now, if you want further support, please do DM me and to set up a strategy call. So, if you're managing a team of change managers and you want to understand how you can push and pull and guide your team members based on their skill sets, let's get some time in. Let's have a chat. We can set that up. Or for anybody on the call, you can also access my free change team capability audit. So that's about assessing the skills within yourself and your team and taking steps based on those. I would recommend you do that audit. And if you've got any questions, again, please do reach out to me. And then finally, also sign up to my newsletter. So I host these free LinkedIn Lives, but I also do smaller masterclasses, only 10 people, so that there is that individual attention and it's two ways. So it's not just you seeing me, it's not a stream, it's a meeting. But I only share these in my newsletter. So if you haven't signed up to my newsletter, do that. There's the link on my profile. So that's it by way of content today. We're just under time. If you've got any questions, please do let me know. Whilst you think about those questions, I'll flip back to this just in case you want to put the URL in for the skills audit. Let me see if I can put that in the chat actually. Wait 1 second. So again, if you have any questions, let me know. I'm going to drop this skills audit into the chat on here. There we go. So that's if you want to access the audit. And then the newsletter is on my profile. So I can't see any questions coming through. I'll give it some time. We've got a few more minutes left. I hope you found that really helpful. What you could do, if possible, is let me know how you've found this session. So if you're able to go back to the Slido, like that. And yeah, if you could just give me some feedback on the session and you can send me some comments, that would be really, really helpful. Would appreciate that so that I can kind of strengthen these going forward. It's the same code as before. Okay, there's a question here. In my personal experience, where would I put myself in my first 3 years in terms of type of change manager? In my first 3 years, I was definitely in the task manager academic. I was very much in that. It probably took me close to 10 years to come out of that space. And that's why I want to surface this conversation, because I think if you're not reflecting on, and let me just remove this, sorry, so that people don't feel, I don't want to skew the results if everybody's seeing it on the screen. But if you're not proactively reviewing and if you don't have guidance to navigate that, it's very hard to make the transition. So yeah, for close to 10 years, I was very much in that academic task manager between those two. And then close to the 10-year mark, I moved into the process driven. And then probably for the last 4 years, 4 to 5 years, that's where I found my strategic footing. So that's why I'm very passionate about sharing this information. Okay, so we're at time. I don't want to keep you. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, please do drop them in the comments. I can get to you at another time, or drop me a DM. Let's get some time in. Otherwise, have a great rest of your day. And thank you again so much for joining. Take care.